Imagine you're sitting on your couch. You aren't running a marathon. You aren't watching a horror movie. You're just sitting. But your hands are trembling. Your heart is pounding so hard you can feel it in your throat. You feel this rising sense of absolute doom, like the world is about to end. If you went to an ER, they'd probably tell you it's a panic attack. They might offer you a sedative and send you home. But for the people we're talking about today, that sensation isn't emotional. It's mechanical. It is a biological engine revving out of control because the brakes have failed. We are talking about adrenal insufficiency. And if you think you know what that is, if you think it's just Addison's disease or taking steroids, you are missing about 90% of the picture. We are diving into a fascinating article from the blog My Adrenal Life, titled Adrenal Insufficiency, Medically Real Things Patients Are Rarely Told. To help me unpack the physiology of living without a stress response, I'm joined by Alex One. Alex, this article argues that the standard medical advice, take your pills and don't die, completely ignores the daily reality of the condition. Where do we even start?
It's a massive topic, Chloe, and you're right. The gap between the textbook definition and the lived reality is huge. We have to start with the history because it explains why we treat it the way we do. When Thomas Addison first described this condition in his famous monograph on the constitutional and local effects of disease of the suprarenal capsules, he wasn't describing people living active lives. He was describing a fatal wasting disease. He called it a state of anemia, general languor, and debility.
Right. Back then, it was a death sentence. There was no treatment.
Exactly. So when replacement steroids like cortisone became available in the mid-20th century, the medical goal was simply keep them alive, prevent the crisis. If the patient isn't dying of shock, the treatment is considered a success. But what this My Adrenal Life article highlights is that not dying is a very different standard from functioning. The body uses cortisol for almost everything, not just surviving a car crash.
Let's look at the first major point the article makes, which I found totally counterintuitive. It says cortisol is a circulatory hormone, not just a stress hormone. I always thought cortisol was just the fight-or-flight juice.
That's the common misconception. We think of adrenaline as the fight-or-flight juice. Cortisol is actually the manager that makes sure the juice works. But regarding circulation, this is pure physics. Think of your blood vessels like a garden hose. For water to shoot out of the nozzle effectively to reach your brain against gravity, the hose needs to be firm. It needs tone.
And cortisol provides that firmness.
Precisely. Physiologically, cortisol sensitizes your blood vessels to catecholamines, things like epinephrine and norepinephrine. If you don't have enough cortisol, your blood vessels ignore the instructions to constrict. They stay floppy. So you stand up, and instead of your body tightening the vessels in your legs to push blood up to your head, the blood just pools in your feet. You get dizzy, lightheaded, maybe you see stars. The article points out that patients often feel this while standing in line, showering, or even just after eating.
Which explains why a patient might have a normal blood pressure reading sitting down at the doctor's office, but feel like they're going to pass out when they stand up to leave.
100%. It's why checking orthostatic vitals, lying down and standing up, is so crucial. The article notes that this lack of vascular tone is a huge driver of daily fatigue. It's exhausting for the heart to try to pump blood through a floppy system. It's like trying to inflate a tire that has a slow leak. You have to work twice as hard to maintain the same pressure.
Okay, so the plumbing is compromised, but the article also mentions the brain. This was the part that really scared me, the idea that the brain suffers before the body does. It lists symptoms like word-finding difficulties and sensory sensitivity.
This is a metabolic issue. The brain is an energy hog. It consumes about 20% of your body's glucose, despite being only 2% of your weight. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid, gluco meaning glucose. Its job is to ensure that glucose is liberated from the liver and delivered to the brain. When cortisol drops, you don't necessarily pass out immediately. Instead, you get what we call neuroglycopenia, low sugar in the brain.
So it's like a brownout. The lights are on, but they're dim.
That's a perfect analogy. The voltage drops. Patients describe it as brain fog, but that sounds too mild. It's cognitive failure. You might be looking at a simple email and you cannot process what it says. Or you become incredibly irritable because your brain is in survival mode, trying to conserve energy. The article makes a vital point here. These symptoms often get misdiagnosed as depression or anxiety.
I can see why. If you tell a doctor, I can't focus and I'm snapping at my spouse, they hear psychological issue. They don't hear metabolic fuel crisis.
Right, but if you give that patient their cortisol dose, the symptoms often vanish in 30 minutes. It's not a serotonin problem, it's a fuel delivery problem. This brings us to the most dangerous misconception the article tackles, the adrenal crisis. We are trained by medical dramas to think a crisis is someone collapsing on the floor, unconscious.
Yeah, the sirens, the gurney, the CPR. But the article describes something much slower and creepier. It lists nausea without vomiting, sleep inversion, intolerance to noise. It calls it a gradual crisis.
The slumbering crisis is a very real danger because the body's trying to compensate. The shutdown happens in stages. One of the earliest signs is actually hearing sensitivity or light sensitivity. Your brain loses the ability to filter out background noise. Suddenly, the refrigerator hum sounds like a jet engine. That is a sign of low cortisol affecting the central nervous system's sensory gating.
That is wild. So you're sitting there annoyed by the sound of the dishwasher, not realizing you're edging toward a medical emergency.
And nausea is another big one. The article points out, and this is supported by endocrine physiology, that low cortisol impairs gut motility. Your stomach just stops emptying. You feel full after 2 bites, or you feel a low-grade nausea. Many patients ignore this until they start vomiting, and by then they can't keep their oral medication down. That's when it becomes the dramatic ER situation. But the goal is to catch it at the everything's too loud and my stomach hurts stage.
This connects to that point about the normal labs fallacy. I feel like this is a universal frustration in chronic illness, but it seems especially acute here. A patient feels terrible, but the doctor says, your sodium and potassium are fine. Your TSH is fine. You're fine.
This is the snapshot problem. A blood test measures your levels at the exact second the needle is in your arm, but cortisol demand is dynamic. It changes minute by minute. If you have a healthy adrenal gland and someone cuts you off in traffic, your adrenals squirt out a microdose of cortisol to handle that stress. Then it goes back down.
But a patient with adrenal insufficiency is taking a pill in the morning and maybe one in the afternoon. They don't have a microdose button for traffic jams.
Exactly. They are operating a manual transmission in a world of automatic cars. A healthy body shifts gears automatically. An AI patient has to manually decide, I am about to present a report at work, I need to upshift, take more cortisol. I am fighting a cold, I need to upshift. If they don't, they stall the engine. A blood test taken at 8 a.m. doesn't tell the doctor that the patient stalled at 4 p.m. because they had a stressful meeting.
That analogy, the manual transmission, is so helpful. It really highlights the cognitive load of the disease. You have to constantly forecast your energy needs.
And that forecasting brings us to the point about adrenaline. This was the cold open scenario you described, the shaking, the palpitations. The article states cortisol buffers adrenaline. This is biochemically fascinating.
Yeah, explain that relationship. I thought steroids made you jittery, but the article says the lack of them makes you jittery?
Both can be true, but in the context of under-replacement, it's about opposition. Think of adrenaline as the gas pedal and cortisol as the brake, or maybe the steering wheel. Adrenaline screams, do something! Cortisol says, okay, let's mobilize glucose and handle this efficiently. Without cortisol, adrenaline is unopposed. It floods the system, your heart races, your hands shake, you sweat. It feels exactly like a panic attack or hypoglycemia, but it's actually your body screaming for cortisol to come and dampen the fire.
So if a patient feels that panic sensation, taking a stress dose of their steroid might actually calm them down.
Counterintuitively, yes. If the panic is driven by low cortisol, taking hydrocortisone will stop the shaking and lower the heart rate. It restores the balance.
But you can imagine how hard it is to explain to a casual observer or even a paramedic. I'm shaking and my heart is racing. Please give me a steroid. They'll look at you like you're crazy.
It seems like so much of this condition is invisible. The article mentions that infection raises cortisol needs before fever appears. That feels like a crucial warning for patients.
It's a survival tip. The immune system uses cytokines, signaling molecules, to fight infection. Things like interleukin-6. These cytokines trigger the brain to ask for more cortisol hours before a fever spikes. In a healthy person, you just feel a bit malaised, a bit off. In an AI patient, that cytokine storm creates a massive demand for cortisol that isn't there. If they wait for the thermometer to read 101 degrees, they might already be in a crisis. The advice is often, if you feel that deep, specific, sick feeling, you treat it immediately.
I want to pivot to the emotional side of this, which the article claims is actually physical. It says emotional stress is physical stress. We usually separate the two, like running a 5K is physical, grieving a loss is emotional. But the adrenal glands don't care.
The hypothalamus, the part of the brain that controls this system, does not distinguish between a bear chasing you and a divorce. Both are threats to homeostasis. Both require metabolic resources. When you are grieving or even just intensely excited, your brain is burning glucose and firing neurotransmitters at a high rate. That costs cortisol. The article emphasizes that patients aren't being dramatic when they crash after an emotional argument. They are metabolically depleted. Their tank is empty.
That validation must be huge for patients. To know that needing to rest after an argument isn't a character flaw.
It's essential. And speaking of rest, the article touches on recovery debt, this idea that healing itself uses cortisol. So if you go to the gym, you use cortisol to exercise, but the next day, when your muscles are knitting themselves back together, that also uses cortisol. Many patients get blindsided by the day 2 crash. They feel okay doing the activity, but they can't get out of bed 48 hours later.
That delayed reaction makes it so hard to learn your limits. You don't get the feedback until it's too late.
Right, it makes planning a life incredibly difficult. And we haven't even touched on the connective tissue aspect. The article mentions connective tissue is hormone sensitive. This is an area that's gaining more research attention. Joint pain, tendinitis, easy bruising.
Yeah, I wouldn't associate sore knees with adrenal failure.
Cortisol regulates inflammation. If your levels are swinging wildly, too low in the morning, too high after a pill, then low again, you have unregulated inflammation in the joints. Plus, collagen turnover requires stable hormones. It's why patients often complain of old person aches, even if they're in their 30s.
It really paints a picture of a systemic issue. It's not just Addison's disease, it's a whole body regulation deficit. The article ends on a point about stability. It says stability is dynamic, not static. What does that mean to you?
It means we have to stop looking for a cure that lets a patient live on autopilot. Success in adrenal insufficiency isn't having 0 symptoms ever. Success is knowing your body so well that you can predict the crash. It's knowing that if you have a big presentation on Tuesday, you need to sleep extra on Monday and maybe bump your dose slightly. It's dynamic because the target is always moving. You are the pilot of the plane, constantly adjusting the altitude.
That is empowering, but also exhausting. It puts so much responsibility on the patient.
It does. And that's why articles like this are vital, because most endocrinologists, with all due respect, see a patient for 15 minutes every 6 months. They check the TSH, the electrolytes, ask if there have been any hospitalizations, and say, see you next time. They aren't there for the 3 p.m. vascular collapse or the emotional crash. Patients have to become the experts on their own physiology.
So if there's one big takeaway for someone listening, maybe a patient or a family member trying to understand, what is it?
It's that cortisol is the currency of life. Every action, thinking, moving, digesting, healing, costs a penny. Most of us have an unlimited bank account. The bank just prints more money when we need it. People with adrenal insufficiency have a fixed allowance. Once it's gone, the lights go out. Understanding that economy, that every stressor has a price tag, is the key to empathy and better management.
The currency of life, that really sticks with you. It changes the perspective from lazy or anxious to budgeting energy. Alex, thank you for breaking down the biology behind the symptoms.
My pleasure, Chloe.
If you know someone navigating this complex condition, or if this episode sheds some light on your own health, consider sending this to a friend who needs to hear it.